So, hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Fugitive Chefs podcast, the show where we talk to chefs and food innovators who have stepped outside the traditional kitchens to build something more personal, more creative, more impactful. Today's guest is Dylan McDonnell. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
And Dylan, what I've heard about you is you're a founder and CEO of Foodini. From what I've read and studied about it, it's a platform tackling one of the biggest challenges in the dining industry today. The whole idea of ingredient transparency. I think that's something we as chefs somehow end up missing out on it if it's not just for compliance. And from your story, you're somebody who has been diagnosed with the celiac disease as a child. And what I've seen is Dylan has spent years navigating a dining world that wasn't really built for people like him. And that personal frustration is what you have used as a fuel behind building Foodini. It's a company that helps diners and restaurants bridge the gap between food safety, trust, and technology. And this episode, basically what I want to focus with you, Dylan, is about how can somebody use their lived experiences into food innovation. So food innovation doesn't always have to start from a big tech tool or a big expensive toy that chefs are playing with, but something personal. How can you turn that into innovation? And how tech can also be a part which can save our relationship between food and diners. So before we deep dive into all of that, Dylan, tell us about yourself. Tell us in the beginning, what was your earliest connection to food? Has it been profession? Has it been home? Has it been studies? What got you here?
Yeah, well, firstly, that was a great introduction. You summed it up very succinctly, very impressive.
I'm glad.
My quick background, you can probably hear a bit of an accent. I'm Irish, although I was born in Philly, so sneaky American, but grew up in Ireland. So my early connection with food was actually mainly negative, right? And it stems back to what you mentioned about celiac. So I was diagnosed celiac when I was 10 years old after a few years being quite sick. So this is kind of a time when, now it's one of the first things doctors think of if people have certain, health issues or gut health issues or anything related to food. 20 odd years ago, 25 years ago, that wasn't really the case. It was still, it was a lot more unknown at the time, let's put it that way. And so, yeah, for 4 or 5 years, I was quite sick all the time. They didn't know what was wrong with me. My poor parents were feeding me like the best of homemade brown bread. But of
Yeah.
course, ironically, that was making me sicker and sicker, and they just didn't know. So, when I finally got diagnosed and just realized, well, the solution here is a gluten-free diet, there was a lot of relief in terms of, okay, well, at least we know
Mm-hmm.
what's making me sick, and that shouldn't happen anymore. But I suppose the next step was, okay, well, what is this and how do I navigate it? And that
Mm-hmm.
was a huge challenge, both in terms of, eating at home, in terms of eating out, in terms of everything really. My mom also, just to answer your question, my mom owned a restaurant in Ireland for 20 years. So,
Okay.
I grew up in and around that space,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously understanding the challenges in running a hospitality business of any description and margins being so tight, and it's a tough business. So I feel like, and we'll come to it, but I definitely had exposure to kind of both sides of the coin growing up
Mm-hmm.
in terms of, food struggles, but also restaurant, and what a tough business that is. But to kind of uh, finish off the journey, I was a corporate lawyer by trade, so not in the food
Wow.
world whatsoever. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, didn't study food in university, didn't, other than working in the family restaurant, wasn't really exposed to food in a massive way.
Mm-hmm.
Was in law, corporate law. That journey, I was kind of worked with a lot of the global tech companies, the Apples, Facebooks, Googles of the world. That journey took me to Australia. Lived in Sydney for a few years, kind of still moved in my capacity as a lawyer. But while there, I started Foodini. And again, the angle was to solve for the problem I had myself, which was dining out with a dietary restriction and I just couldn't understand why it was still so difficult. Like, why was I still going to restaurants that didn't have the information I needed, or they were giving me the wrong information, or they'd served me the wrong food and I'd be sick for a week afterwards. Like, I was like, in this era, this should no longer be the case. Why is it still the case? And what can I do to solve it? And that's kind of where Foodini was born from.
Crazy. And how did you I would like to know from your mother's point of view or from people working in that family restaurant point of view, was this at that point, was this something new to them? Did they know about celiac disease as such? And how did they see you as somebody who works in this environment where you can't really I don't think food professionals are very big fans of having allergens or intolerances. How was that exchange?
Yeah, well, like I mean, how do I answer that question? Uh, it was new to all of us in the family, 100%. Like this was not something that my parents or most people around us had come across at the time. Now, today, everyone knows someone who's gluten free. Like literally, it's
Right.
so prevalent. But back then, it really wasn't. And so there was a lot of education, a lot of learning that was done. And mom opened a restaurant a good few years after I was diagnosed as well. So it wasn't like we had a family restaurant business prior to that this impacted. But what it did impact is that we were one of the, rural Ireland, but we were one of the first restaurants to have like gluten-free bread offerings and like to be aware of it as a facility when, guests were coming in. So it definitely helped the other gluten-free people in the area, that's for sure.
Yeah. And what's at that point your approach to, because I've heard a lot of theories about, I don't know how much of it is true. I think you're the person who would know more about it as somebody who lived with it. I saw this documentary. It's a book actually by Michael Pollan called Cooked, long time ago, and there he explains how, I mean, his theory is how. I don't know if it's theory or fact. First of all, let me clear that gluten intolerance was born because many countries, I mean, America especially, introduced super bread, and then super bread came with a lot of things which are not wheat, and that's how our body started kind of building this annoyance for things which are not wheat. They're just like emulsifiers, stabilizers, and things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. No, it's a great actually point. It's interesting. There's a lot of data about different food allergies around the world. So obviously gluten-free and celiac's the one that's prevalent to me. Funnily enough, Italy has the highest rate of celiac disease per head of capital in the world. Ireland is
Wow.
number two. And the one of the reasons or hypotheses around that I've heard actually stems back to the potato famine. So they reckon
Okay.
that when a few hundred years ago the potato famine came and wiped out the potato crop, and a lot of Irish people died at that time as part of that, and then we started importing wheat to make up for it and to start eating that. We genetically developed a higher intolerance to wheat and gluten than a lot of other countries around the world. So that's one theory I've heard, but I've absolutely heard similar that the US, food quality and ingredients in it definitely contribute to a lot of it in the United States. And just to come back to a question you mentioned earlier, um, you mentioned about a lot of restaurants seeing people with food allergies as an annoyance, and
Yeah.
there is definitely I've come across that many times. I think there's sometimes certain restaurateurs who think that these are just people who are trying to be difficult or who are one in a thousand, and we don't really need to cater for them. But that was one of the other, I suppose, big aha moments for me, was when I dug into just how many people are impacted by this problem, because you kind of think
Hmm.
it's you and your own little bubble and a few other people, but in the United States, 33 million Americans have a diagnosed food allergy. So that's about 1 in 10 diagnosed food allergy. Then you have another 50 million Americans who have a food intolerance. That means they have a negative reaction to the food, but it's not technically an allergy, a medical allergy. And then you
Hmm.
have another 70 million Americans who fall into the bracket of a preference: vegan,
Okay.
vegetarian, keto, paleo, low FODMAP, low carb, etc. So it's actually a huge, huge, huge market in terms of the amount of people who need to or want to understand what is in their food to ascertain if it is suitable for them based on their personal medical or lifestyle requirements. And so
Hmm.
for restaurants, and I think this has become clear over the last decade, but they no longer really are in a position to ignore this market segment or treat them as an annoyance, because you're losing so much revenue in such a huge market segment if you do.
Definitely. And what was your first reaction to when you said, with your experience, that you ordered stuff that you did not get, or people didn't really get the intensity or grasp the understanding of what a celiac disease is? Was your thinking that these people who are serving me something are ignorant, or are they not educated enough? Like, what was your first, why was it happening to you
No,
think?
no, and I think it's a very good question, because to answer it, I have to say that we have a ton of empathy for the restaurant industry in trying to deal with this situation. It's not like restaurants are the bad guys and consumers are the good guys. Like it's a really hard thing to do, especially for smaller businesses. It's not like there's this data layer that you can just tap into to pull this data. It hasn't really existed to date, and so it's actually quite a tough exercise for a restaurant manually themselves to do this. But the reality is, when you don't do the exercise and you don't give the staff a resource
Right.
to answer the questions that consumers ask, they're powerless. Like, how, if I'm a waiter and I haven't been trained on whether there's peanuts in all of the menu items, how am I going to answer the question when when a customer asks me? I can't. I either say I don't know, or I obviously go into the kitchen and try and speak with the chef and figure it out that way and start looking at the back of packets and blah blah blah. Or which is what happens, unfortunately, a lot of the time. Due to a lack of training, staff don't realize the seriousness of getting this wrong, and so you get the dreaded I think. I think it's gluten free. I don't think it contains nuts. And that's when you know they don't know. And that's
Mm.
when you have to decide, okay, do I risk it? Or do I insist on no, you either I have to leave now or I need you to go and confirm this for 100%. And
Hmm.
the difference for me as a celiac, I'll get sick if I eat the wrong thing. But someone who's anaphylactic or has like a nut or peanut or egg or dairy allergy when it's anaphylactic, like that's life and death, literally.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the margin for error just isn't there. For the most part, I don't think it's out of badness. I just think
Hmm.
it's out of a lack of process internally in the restaurant, a lack of training, and a lack of documentation.
And Dylan, was there something specific that happened, a specific experience that happened for you where you felt like not just observing the problem or like thinking the work around it, but where you felt that okay, I have to contribute to this change, or there is something specific I need to that happened, and then you said, okay, I need to step into this to solve it.
I think it was a build up. It
Hmm.
wasn't like there was one major incident. It was a culmination of a lot of small incidents over a long time, culminating in me being like, how is this still the way this is? Resulting in me doing research into why is it this way. And I think it was when I went and looked at the data in terms of the numbers of consumers who had the problem and then spoke to a lot of them. And like while I was still practicing as a lawyer and doing my market research and just speaking to mothers of kids with food allergies and people with these problems and being like, how do you deal with this? Is this a real problem for you? Like, how big of a problem? And continuing to get back, this is a huge problem. There is no solution. It's a nightmare. It impacts me every day, every meal. Like, sometimes we don't dine out anymore because we don't feel safe. Like, I'm terrified for my teenager who's going out in the world, whether they, are able to fend for themselves. It's life and death for, it was just this constant onslaught of feedback from such a huge segment of the population that I was like, okay, well, whether I'm the right person to solve this or not, I don't know, but it feels like a worthwhile cause. And I'm going to dedicate as much time as I can to see if I can figure it out.
Yeah. And what is this that you have like found as a gap where you fit in? Because of course, as you said, I mean, it's also a commercially smart idea for restaurants to be inclusive of all kinds of allergies and tolerances. And then there is the food companies producing the gluten-free range of things. There's government making regulations for these kind of things. Which gap did you see that you said after your market research, this is the one I can fill? And what are you
Yeah.
contributing over there?
Yeah, so just to explain how we work. So we
Hmm.
work with restaurants and food service companies. So we work with restaurants, hotels, stadiums, schools, universities, any facility that serves food, we can work with. And essentially what we do is we take all of their existing menu data and we tag it accurately with the correct ingredients, allergens, and dietaries. So typically, and I know you have a lot of restaurateur, folk listening, so they'll resonate with this. We'll take your menu data from typically your POS. We'll take your recipe data, typically from an inventory or a recipe management system. But again, we work with a lot of small businesses where it's on an Excel sheet or handwritten or what have you. And then
Right.
we also take your product data. We plug in with all the kind of suppliers, manufacturers, distributors, so we can, get the exact SKU number as well. And we
Hmm.
aggregate all of that data using our kind of AI solution. We also have a team of dietitians who kind of work as part of this process as well. But essentially, what we end up with is a complete um, uh, insight into every ingredient in every menu item and every corresponding allergen and dietary for that menu item. And what that back-end data set allows us to do is power a personalized menu experience for the consumer. So typically consumers will walk into a restaurant we work with, there'll be a QR code on the menu saying food allergies, dietary needs scan here. There'll be a button on the website in the menu section, allergy dietary menu. When they scan or click, it brings up a web app experience, so don't need to download an app, it's a URL experience. They create straight away a dietary profile, choosing from 150 different diets and allergens. So gluten, nuts, keto, vegan, save, and instantly
Hmm.
the menu auto customizes to them. Here's what you
Oh
can
wow.
eat. Here's what you can eat with a modifier and what that modifier is, and here's
Hmm.
what you can't eat and why, because it contains X and Y ingredient that are baked in and can't be removed. So it's a completely personalized menu product based on the dietary profile of the consumer. And what we've seen to kind of answer that's the kind of product, right? And what
Hmm.
we've seen as a result of that, to answer the second part of your question, is the first I've already alluded to. You've
Hmm.
173 million Americans, for example, who make dining decisions based on their dietary preferences. If the consumer doesn't understand or trust that there is an item for them at your restaurant, they will not come. So
Right.
not only are you losing that consumer, you also lose their friends, their
Hmm.
family, their coworkers, all of the people that they normally dine with. And we call that the veto vote. We can't organize the group lunch at somewhere where Dylan the celiac can't eat at.
Hmm.
So not only is it a big revenue loss, but it's also a massive revenue opportunity for those restaurants that do this correctly and publish this information to consumers and put it in their hands. So that's number one. And the second half of that is there is no one more loyal than a food allergy customer. They find it
Right.
so hard to find places that they like and that they trust that once they do, they just keep going back again and again and again and again and again. So again, big revenue opportunity, number one. Two is operational efficiencies. We see about a 60% reduction in the number of questions being asked to staff who use our
Hmm.
technology. And not only is that obviously saving on labor costs, line management, blah, 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 but what that also results in is a massive reduction in mistakes.
Hmm.
54% of all mistakes that happen in restaurants around food allergies happen after the staff get notified of the allergy. And so what that tells you is the system is broken. It tells you human error is what gets it wrong almost all the time. Back to what we were talking about, the dreaded,
Yeah.
I think. Take that out of play, put a documented single source of truth in front of the consumer that they can access themselves, and take that pressure off your wait staff who might have started yesterday and be casual part-time for being an expert on every ingredient and every allergen and every menu item, which is virtually impossible outside of maybe super high-end fine dining where they're extremely
Hmm.
well trained.
Yeah.
And then the third point is data. We can tell our restaurants that last month in X location, you had 1,000 dietary profiles created. 40% were gluten free, 25% were vegan, 10% were keto. You only have one keto option on your menu. If you swap out this ingredient and these four items, they would all become keto. That could drive your bottom line by X, Y. So from a menu optimization standpoint and just understanding your consumers and marketing efforts as well, that consumer dietary profile is extremely valuable to our partners.
No, definitely. I mean, it's brilliant all that you're saying, and I feel like it's like all brilliant ideas. I think it's like something so obvious because what you've done is basically put the power in both sides of the table of the diner, also the person managing the restaurant, and the chef behind the screen who's building it. So there's no chance for a mistake because you have not left room for assuming that somebody who's catering to you will know exactly all these diets, what they mean, and what these complex words entail at the end of the day. And I feel, I mean, what you explained today is a very multifaceted operation. I think there's a lot of back end behind it. As you said, you have the dietitians, you have the whole data experts behind it. But what were the early days like? What are the first few challenges you had when building this? Was it more like convincing the possibility of a tool like this? Was it more like finding people resourceful to say help you on the tech side of things?
Oh, mate, yeah, it was very manual.
Uh
If
huh.
we were still doing now what we were doing at the start, we would not have a company that could
Yeah.
grow. Because it's until you kind of roll up your sleeves and like
Mm-hmm.
really work with restaurants to understand why is this so difficult, you can't understand, it becomes clear quickly why this isn't already wide stream. And it's because it's hard.
Right.
And as I kind of alluded to earlier, there's not this magic data set that exists
Mm-hmm.
that enables this. Like we essentially are this aggregator that sits in the middle of all of these different players, and we need all of them and all of their data and the restaurant buy-in to be able to do what we do.
For sure.
And like again, we're here to make this super easy and simple for restaurants. So if a
Mm-hmm.
restaurants do it by themselves, and let me preface this by saying what I say to all restaurants when it comes to this space. Number one, make sure you invest in food allergy training. So put Foodini to one side. It's not that expensive. Get your staff trained on food allergy matters. It could literally be the difference between one of your staff accidentally setting someone into anaphylactic shock and which not only legal risk, but PR and brand risk. It's just not that expensive to invest in food allergy training, number one. Number two, document your ingredients and allergens. If you don't want to
Hmm.
use a solution like Foodini and you'd rather, do it in a binder, on a piece of paper, on a spreadsheet, or whatever it is that, you make sense for you, that's fine. But if you do not have that source of truth for your staff to find a way to rely on and answer questions, you are opening yourself up for so many problems and issues. Again, think about it logically. If it's not documented, how are they going to answer the question? And if they do try to then figure it out by, looking at the back of a pack and blah blah, that's where they miss things like, but was it cooked in butter?
Hmm.
Maybe the product itself doesn't have dairy on the label, but it could have been cooked in butter, which now puts dairy in it, which now makes it an allergic dish for that customer. And those are the things that staff often don't think of on the fly in a busy restaurant environment when there's,
Yeah.
tables shouting at them and waiting for food and blah 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 blah. Like, again, these are the high stress and high pressure moments that result in mistakes being made by staff because they're not thinking clearly and through it all. Again, have something they can refer to as a document. And of course, we then, as Foodini, do believe that you should also put this in the customer's hands to allow them to make that informed decision. Whether, again, you want to use a PDF type solution that's static and still has the information, I still would highly recommend that. Obviously, we believe a tech dynamic, more personalized solution is better, but at least a PDF document is 100% better than nothing as well. So those are the kind of three things we say to all restaurants we work with that I just believe are no-brainer steps to protect you and to protect the customers.
Yeah, I mean, makes complete sense. I mean, what you said about the tech solution, the benefit is that, of course, it removes friction in a business like ours where there is high competition. There's like all restaurants struggling with all kinds of problems from staffing to prices. And I feel if one thing can give you that edge over other restaurants, I think it's a great solution. Also, I loved what you said about staff training. I think that's one place. I think it's also, again, what I said, the rotation rate doesn't. There are places which I've seen in my experience working that have built a team where they feel they do these trainings and they put the effort in it. But most restaurants I know move staff so fast that they feel that it's not worth giving that training. But again, what goes around comes around. So in the end, if you educate your team, it might end up going somewhere where it'll add to that. But in that sense, what you said in the end about it being a no-brainer, and that's where I wanted to bug you a little bit. Like you said, 170 million Americans are affected by food allergies and or sensitivities, as you call them. And that's massive. I mean, it's not a small bunch of people. It's a massive chunk. But most of us barely think about it. Like most of us running restaurants, it's not the first thought on our mind. It's not on mind when you're making like new menus in spring, in autumn. It's not the first thing on your head. And why do you think the industry has struggled to address this? Is there like too many problems and this is not on the priority list? Or why is it that it has been ignored so much?
It's a great question. And I think in the first instance, yes, restaurants have bigger burning fires in the first instance to think about. Be the first to acknowledge that there is labor, there is margin, there's the cost of food going up, there is, building a brand that actually draws customers in. There are 101 different things that restaurateurs are trying to deal with every single day. And often food allergies feels and seems like, a nice to have thing to solve versus a must have. And I get that. I would have been the same before I started this journey. And I think for us, a lot of it is education and awareness to restaurateurs to kind of help them understand that not only is this something that protects you and makes your operation far more efficient, but it is a big revenue opportunity if you can publish this information in the right way. And the other thing is, it's going to become mandatory in the near future anyway. And I think that's kind of where your question was going as well.
Hmm.
Look at Europe, right?
Yeah.
The EU introduced regulations, nearly 15 years ago, around tagging for the major food allergens, 14 as it is in Europe, it's only 9 in the US, on every menu, right? Now, different states have introduced that in different ways, but take Ireland as an example. You cannot open a restaurant or any kind of food service in Ireland without tagging for the major 14 allergens on every menu. Full stop.
Hmm.
Mom and pop
Wow.
shop, chain, doesn't matter, cannot do it by law. Full stop. In the US, traditionally, there has been no law whatsoever about food allergies in restaurants. They don't even have to document it if they don't want to.
Hmm.
Nothing. Zilch. Until 3 weeks ago. On the 13th of October, Gavin Newsom in California for the first time signed a bill called SB 68, which mandates that restaurant groups with 20 plus locations, where any one of those locations is in California, must label their menus for the major nine food allergens effective 1 July 26. And so, for the first time in the US, pretty much every national and mid market chain is going to have to document this information on both their physical and digital menus. And we believe, and this is just the first domino to fall towards echoing Europe and having this applied to all restaurants across the board. Um, and it's a major step forward. It's a massive positive, and it's going to protect the consumer who currently is relying again on wait staff to potentially be the difference between life and death for them, because they're the only person who gatekeeps whether there's any allergies in food or not, and because there's no like layer of documentation that sits behind it. So it's a huge step forward here, and we're really excited to see the impact that that has on just the restaurant industry holistically.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I love you. I love that you took that plunge to get into the regulations, because that was my next question. But I think you have answered the major chunk of it. And I was also like aware about this. I wasn't about what you said about California, yeah, imposing those now. But I know that they had started a new law about. I think it was Gavin Newsom as well who said about ultra processed foods being out of public school menus now in California, which is I think a great move. I think something very important as well. But also I loved the part that you said about how it's a money saving move, because I feel the same thing happens with sustainability, right? Sustainability has now there's now a food waste law in Europe, which is slowly coming into practice. There's like a 1 year gap, 1 year leverage period for restaurants to enact upon it, or grocery stores cannot throw anything, restaurants cannot throw anything at all. And I feel all that's good. I mean, regulation does its job, but I feel more than a moral question or more than just being right sometimes is not enough. As you said, restaurants have more burning fires, but once you attach it to money, or once you attach to, you can either capture more audience or save more money. Somehow you get these ears pointed towards you, and they are more interested to listen. And on that sense, I would like to ask you, like when you approach now as somebody who represents Foodini and wants people to adopt this as a solution, what are the few things that you think stick out for a restaurant? Like when you pitch your solution, what are the things they sympathize the more with or connect with you the most with when it comes to the solution?
Yeah, I think it depends on the organization. So, like I outlined kind of the four major benefits earlier in terms of like revenue, loyalty, operational efficiency, less mistakes and legal risk, and then also the data. I think it depends on the org. Like, for example, we onboarded a major stadium recently, and for them, the big thing was line management. So they have these,
Right.
minutes of time during a 2.5 hour game at halftime or between quarters where there's a rush at the concession stand. And if Dylan the Celiac gets to the top of the queue and spends 3 minutes quizzing a member of staff about whether what's
Mm,
gluten free or not, that's a disaster, because that's literally the one segment of time you have to make all your concession money, and the line is building up behind Dylan, and you're not keeping it moving and making as much revenue as you can in that time. So for them, it was that. For the revenue opportunity and the loyalty piece is huge, because they understand and they know and they've seen that by adding the vegan option to the menu or the gluten-free option to the menu has attracted a loyal consumer base in that space, and they understand that by doubling down and continuing to invest in these segments, that they can continue to attract new customers and then retain them critically, which is a huge part. Get them into their loyalty programs, blah 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 blah. So it really does depend on the org, Furqan. I've seen different decision makers resonate with all of those things, but I think the other thing that is appreciated now by industry is the kind of momentum in this space. Like
right.
they're beginning to see now not just the regulation in California. There's another bill coming in New York which applies to all restaurants.
Hmm.
Illinois and Oregon are about to go next. Federally, there's a lot of stuff happening. You mentioned what's happening in California with ultra processed foods in schools. There's a lot of stuff with MAHA happening right now with food dyes. There is federally there's some other things that MAHA are doing around ingredient transparency and whatnot. So there's a lot of movement in this space, and I think there's a recognition now in industry that you know transparency is becoming an expectation of consumers as
Hmm.
opposed to a nice to have, and that the way the modern day consumer makes decisions is different. and that they need to kind of fall in step with that. And transparency, the biggest piece of transparency that matters is the ingredients in the food.
Yeah. No, it's super cool to hear that. I mean, again, we're both, I think, sitting in privileged places where these things are happening. But it's again good to see that these changes are happening, because I mean, it's all a ripple effect. It's all a matter of time before these, translate to bigger populations. Because I feel like back in India, for example, I feel there's so much of undetected problems. I mean, most of India is lactose intolerant, but nobody basically knows about it. There's gluten
Yeah.
intolerance is very high, but our carb consumption is massive. A normal Indian meal is full of carbs, and people are just not aware about it. But I wanted to ask you the flip side of this question, Dylan, because what you said about all these benefits of this technology, or just maintaining education around allergens. But what about the side of, there's a whole generation of people who will see that as something which replaces humans, which now needs less human. And I mean, over here, I'm being a devil's advocate, even though I believe you're bringing something very innovative to the restaurant industry. How do you see like tech like yours, which helps restaurants get efficient, be it with the stadium that you mentioned? How does it, like what part of tech of that is useful, and what part of it still needs the human side of, I don't know, creativity or intuition, this balance between tech and human? How do you see that?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question. We're definitely not at a point where it's tech only. Let's put it that way. Like we have a team of dietitians, and we call it like human in the loop. Like we've trained large language models and used AI to completely streamline the process, right? So the tech does the heavy lifting, but there's no doubt about it. We still need our dietitian team. Like our tech now has got extremely good at flagging anything it's not sure about. Because there's often a missing ingredient, a missing product, a missing spec sheet. So, the tech detects that something looks funny in this menu item. It's not what we it would expect to see, and it raises a flag, and that is the flag that our dietitian team will then, through a human eyes, look at and decide whether it's something that is there's an easy answer to, or whether it's something we need to clarify with the restaurant. And when it comes to something like food allergies, there is no margin for error, right? So, we're certainly not in a position yet where I would say we'd let our tech run riot without having the human in the loop. Do I think in the future we'll get there? Probably. But we're not there yet. And I think that's the same for most companies, to be honest. I think, if you want to scale your business, it's going to be very hard to do it without using AI and large language models and whatnot, or your competitors are going to kill you. But I don't think the tech is in a place that the humans are out of the picture as yet. But like the reality of, if you ask me this question again in 5 years' time,
Hmm.
you might have a different answer. And it is scary how quickly a lot of this technology is developing in every industry, frankly.
Yeah, talking about the future, right? 5 years from now, as you said. Another question I had from you, which is maybe not completely related with allergens, but I feel it's more about personalizing meals, because the company I work at, I work in R&D center. We do a lot of personalized, meal plans, experiences, or working around personalized dining. We worked with this city building in Saudi Arabia, which is gonna be just about personalized dining. I've seen like innovations in Japan where they're like toilets which detect your urine every day and will tell you basically what sort of food you need to eat, what nutrition you're missing. There are a lot of people which have these personal trackers on them. So the diner of the future is very aware, I think, to some extent. I do not know how much of that awareness is correct information, or if the information is correct or not. But how do you see the category of personalized dining? What are some things that you're looking forward to, or you're hoping the future would look like in terms of personalizing dining experiences?
Personalization is the name of the game. Like you're kind of hitting the nail on the head. Like I talked about the modern day consumer and their expectation from a transparency perspective. Their bigger expectation is personalization. Like everywhere they go, whether it's their TikTok feed or Netflix or wherever it is, they expect that the experience is personalized to them and their needs and their wants and their likes. And I think if we dive into like, above and beyond the algorithm understanding that they love Indian food from this restaurant, I think that the next layer deeper and every bit as important is understanding that consumers now are getting a lot more health focused. And you look at the food as medicine movement. You look at all of the microbiome and gut health and biomarker testing kits that are blowing up right now. Function Health, Superpower, all these companies that are enabling this cheaply for the first time, where people are finally understanding that these are the foods that are disagreeing with them or that they need to eat more of. You have people like Mark Laurie at Wonder who has a vision to send out these testing kits to customers, have them do the tests, and then off the back of that, develop a personalized meal kit for them that then gets shipped to their home. Like that's the level of personalization that some of the biggest visionaries in this space are envisioning. And I completely agree with that. I think the consumer, modern day consumer, is going to get more and more insistent on what it does and does not want to put in its body, both in terms of what it wants to put in and then demanding visibility as to whether what they're about to consume has that or does not have that. And I honestly think we're still at ground zero here in terms of where this is going to go. And I think if I was, as I think about the restaurant industry and the food service industry, I just think they need to, there needs to be an awareness that this is coming if it's not there already. It is coming. Consumers are not going to start getting less picky and
Hmm.
stop asking about ingredients and allergens, whatever. The data shows it is growing rapidly year on year on year on year. We have one of our investors, I think
Hmm.
there's 20, they're in New York. There's 21 children in the class. 19 of the kids have food allergies. No two
Wow.
kids have the same set of allergies. Like that is the prevalence that is happening, at the like child level. Give them another few years to come up the ranks with those allergies and then with this continued focus on health and preferences. It's only going one way and it's a challenge for restaurateurs in the food service industry to deal with these consumers, but it's also an opportunity. Do it right, do it well, and you're going to have a major edge on your competition and the restaurants down the street.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Dylan, you said it. I mean, data is king over here. The big data, machine learning, all the technology behind that. I feel Foodini right now, the app you've built, the technology you've built is around your core problem of growing up. And I feel it's a very good vertical niche to prove that product market fit. But again, once you have the data of these diners, the it's endless the possibilities that you can do with that data, not just getting into, I don't know, there's I have students in the university I working with adaptogens, I don't know, energy bars to get you to sleep. There's so much happening around it that I feel the more aware it is. I mean, a restaurant can of course be scared listening to this podcast. It's going to get crazy for me, and I'll run out of business if I don't contract this technology. But again, I mean, it's only scary if you don't prepare for it, and if you know about it, and if there's people like you out there who have lived it firsthand, preparing something which is tested within. I think that's the best way to catch up and stay in the game for a little longer.
Yeah, and I
But
think the last thing I'll just say on that as well is I think the difference now with technology is the cost of also doing this has plummeted. Like traditionally,
mhm.
if you wanted to get someone to come in and do your allergen matrix, for example, even just the basic nine, could cost you $20,000, and then it's just a static PDF that has to keep being updated over time. Like, that's when it was manual. Like we can do the same thing with a better customer experience that's kept up to date, that's plugged into all the rest of your tech stack for a fraction of that amount now. And so the barrier, the beauty of the technology is that it is now enabling restaurants to do what before was both hard and expensive and manual. And so I think that's the other piece here. And that's across the board. That's not just in our world. There's the AI tools that are out there now, from bookkeeping to legal to marketing to sales to every part of your business, are incredible. And there's so many focused restaurant vertical ones as well. I think investing in the best in class tech stack is gonna give restaurants an edge.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, and speaking about how you've spoken about the technology yourself and how passionate you are, and you spoke about investors and how this as a business, like the business side of things. How do you see when you go approaching investors or talking about, I don't know, pitching this idea to people who would invest in it? How is the atmosphere around food startups? Because I know, for example, from my personal experience in Europe, when we see the whole scale of how VCs are funding or how private equity is funding startups, food and agriculture or food and ag tech is a very small compared to, I don't know, the big startups. And I hear about the States a lot. I'm currently reading a book from Andrew Chen about the cold start problem, which goes around all the big tech startups, Netflix, Tinder,
Great book.
Uber.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful book. And like reading that, and then everything around how Airbnb was built, the Brian Chesky stories, Y Combinator, the whole culture of like startups and tech funding. Does your product appeal as a tech product, or is it something I mean, they don't feel knowledgeable enough for that? How is the approach to your product?
Yeah, no, we're an AI company ultimately, right? At our core, like we are, the core of our tech, AI and data is what powers our entire ecosystem, our entire product, our entire everything. And so, um, food, like we're not a food company, we're a food tech company, a restaurant tech company as well. But like ultimately, what we're trying to do like from a company standpoint is build the data layer that powers ingredient transparency across the whole food ecosystem. We want to be that middle layer that works not just with all the restaurants and hotels and food service providers, but with all of online ordering, with your DoorDashes, your Uber Eats, your Grubhubs, with your first party ordering as well, with all like just being that layer that manages this entire problem. And not just in the US, this is a global problem, as we've kind of alluded to as well. So the vision and the opportunity for us as a company, I believe is absolutely massive. And for investors, as you said, who aren't necessarily experts in the space, which most are not, it's just an edge. It's like anything. You just have to educate them. Give them the data, give them the information they need to learn and about what we do and how we do it and what the opportunity is, and then allow them to make an informed decision. And anyone who's raised venture before will know that there's plenty of no's for every yes, and you're not a fit for everyone. But it's just a matter of grinding until you find the people who resonate, understand the mission, understand the opportunity, and who back you to be the right team to execute.
Yeah, I mean, and no better way to do it once you lived the problem yourself and grown up in a family where you had a restaurant yourself. So, Dylan, before we leave this podcast, I wanted to ask you, like, what keeps you going? What is, like, I don't know if there's one rewarding moment from since launching Foodini. What has it been for you?
Customer feedback on how important this is to them and what a difference it would make in their lives. I think that's what it keeps coming back to. It's like this is not a problem where we're saving 10 cents for someone on every transaction. This is solving a problem for people which can save their lives and can enable them to act like a lot of people who don't have food allergies, which is just being able to go to a restaurant and enjoy the experience like everyone else. And food and dining out and that whole experience is such, I think, a huge fabric of society and community and life generally. And so many people are feel excluded from that or feel unable to enjoy that because of this lack of transparency that has existed for a long, long time. And so the genuine knowledge that we are making a tangible difference for such a huge segment for a real problem that truly does exist. Nothing has changed for me since that first aha moment. And I've just been bullish on making sure that we can scale this solution to help all those people and the restaurant industry at the same time ever since.
I mean, it's amazing to hear your experience, Dylan. Lastly, before we close this, as I told you in the beginning, the listeners over here are people who are, I would say most of the listeners are still in restaurants or people studying culinary education or people getting into the trade. And major chunk of them also people who are sort of done with the restaurant model and they're looking for like what else can they contribute to. And I feel like chefs, have a lot of knowledge apart from like they have a lot of knowledge about daily operations. They can contribute to, I don't know, jobs and careers outside the restaurant system, be it in food policy making. I think people in food policy need advisors who have been chefs before, or I don't know, in education, you need people who have been chefs before. What advice would you give to them, especially to people who want to head a business, so like be an entrepreneur? Because like the things that you said, for me the biggest takeaway is like how you said before this became a tech company, it was very much about paper and pen, walking into restaurants, doing this in a small scale, on like using the lean startup model to test your product market fit, and then taking it the whole tech side of things. What else could you say to people who have these entrepreneurial ideas as a chef?
Well, a great example for anyone who's a chef out there, we partner with a company called Meez, Meez, and their CEO and founder, Josh, is a chef. And he essentially built a recipe management tool, which is probably the best recipe management tool that exists in the US from that functionality standpoint. And again, he was like myself, a non-technical background. He was a chef and he built a tool to help chefs because again, who could have better subject matter expertise than himself? And so what I would say is one, if you have a vision for, solving a problem that you experience yourself in your everyday work, you are very likely the most likely and the best candidate to solve for that. But secondly, to your point, it's not like you have an idea and then the next day you have a company, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I would advise anyone who has that idea to spend plenty of time doing a lot of market research. Like how big of a problem is this really? If it's like, is it a big enough market for an investor to back?
Mm-hmm.
Speak to as many other people that you think experience that problem and validate truly. And don't just ask for oh, just tell me this is a great idea. Like challenge them to truly answer the question honestly and validate, no, this is something that is a problem and this is something I would pay for if you could solve for it as well. And like do as much of that diligence and homework as you can before, taking a more significant plunge. But again, we talked about AI and tech. The beauty now is there are tools like Lovable and other like vibe coding tools out there that anybody with no technical experience whatsoever can spin up a prototype, in a matter of days now, to test and to see if there's something there. So the barrier to entry has dropped drastically from what it would have been 5 years ago. And so again, if you truly believe in the idea and you've kind of got the validation and data you believe you need to give it a go, absolutely back yourself and give it a go. But I would always just say take the bit of time to get that validation first before you quit your job and hand in your notice. That's certainly what I did. I took several months before I built up the conviction that this was the right thing to do.
No, beautiful, Dylan. I mean, I couldn't sum it up better. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing your story and for showing how a personal struggle that you started off with in the beginning of the podcast can lead to like a whole systemic change. I see it as a systemic change because I feel this is the last piece of the puzzle which is missing for a restaurant who really wants to comply with these allergens and intolerance. They have an easy tool now, and there is no room for complaining anymore. And you have showed us how food and tech can together make the world a little safer for millions of people. It's not a handful. So yeah, thank you so much. We will link to you and to Foodini in the show notes, and it's been a pleasure.
Appreciate it a lot. Thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed the chat.